The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, innocent and white against the marble. But to Mark, walking through the door at 7 a.m. with his shirt buttoned wrong and lipstick on his collar, it might as well have been a bomb. His wife Katherine stood behind it, her face a mask of calm that terrified him more than any rage could have. 15 years, she said quietly. 15 years, and this is what you do with them. If you're feeling the tension already, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of betrayal, redemption, and the consequences we never see coming. Mark's stomach dropped as he realized what was happening. The late nights. The deleted texts. The perfume that wasn't Katherine's. It had all caught up to him in ways he never imagined possible. "Kat, please, I can explain," he stammered, his hangover suddenly intensifying as adrenaline coursed through his body. "There's nothing to explain," Katherine replied, sliding the envelope toward him. "I've known for months. I just needed to be sure, and to get my affairs in order." Mark's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out, alongside photographs. Him entering a hotel. Him kissing another women, actually, on different nights. The evidence was damning and thorough. "How did you? Does it matter?" Katherine asked, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "What matters is that while you were building a life of lies, I was building an exit." The truth was that Katherine had suspected something was wrong for nearly a year. The late work meetings, the sudden business trips, the way Mark would shower immediately upon coming home. Small things that added up to a mountain of suspicion. She'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago, a decision that had torn her apart inside. Katherine had always believed in trust, in the sanctity of their marriage. But the PI's reports confirmed her worst fears. Mark hadn't just been unfaithful once, it was a pattern, with multiple women. "I don't understand," Mark said, collapsing into a kitchen chair. "We have a good life. A beautiful home. Why would I risk that?" Katherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what I've been asking myself. Why would you? Was I not enough? Did our vows mean nothing to you?" The truth was more complicated than either of them could articulate in that moment. Mark had grown up watching his father cheat on his mother repeatedly. He'd sworn he'd never be that man, yet somehow, he'd fallen into the same patterns. Success at work had fed his ego. Attention from younger women had made him feel powerful. Each transgression had been easier than the last, until infidelity became woven into the fabric of his life. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "That might be the only honest thing you've said to me in months," Katherine replied. But intentions don't erase consequences. Katherine had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She'd secured a new apartment, transferred her portion of their joint savings, and consulted with the best divorce attorney in the city. She'd done everything by the book, ensuring that when this moment came, she would be ready. What Mark didn't know was how many nights she'd spent crying, how many times she'd considered forgiveness, how desperately she'd wanted their marriage to be salvageable. But each new report from the PI had driven the knife deeper, until Katherine realized that staying would cost her something more precious than their shared history, her self-respect. "I'll be staying with my sister until the apartment is ready," Katherine said, picking up a suitcase that Mark hadn't noticed by the door. "The movers will come for the rest of my things next week." "You can't just leave," Mark protested, panic rising in his chest. The reality of what was happening finally hitting him. "We need to talk about this. We can fix this." "Fix what, exactly?" Katherine asked. "Your ability to look me in the eye and lie. Your capacity to share your body with strangers while I waited at home? Or maybe your talent for making me question my own worth." The word struck Mark like physical blows. For the first time, he saw the situation through Katherine's eyes, the betrayal, the humiliation, the erosion of trust that he'd caused. "I loved you," Katherine continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I built my life around that love. And you treated it like it was disposable. As Katherine moved toward the door, Mark felt a desperation he'd never experienced before. The comfortable life he'd taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. The woman who had stood by him through graduate school, his father's death, the early struggles of his career, she was walking away, and he had no one to blame but himself. "Please," he begged. "One chance. That's all I'm asking for." Katherine paused, her hand on the doorknob. For a brief moment, Mark thought he might have reached her. But when she turned, her eyes were clear and resolved. "I already gave you 15 years of chances," she said. "I won't give you one more day." The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than a slam would have. Mark stood alone in the kitchen of their beautiful home, surrounded by the trappings of the life they'd built together, and realized too late what he had thrown away. In the weeks that followed, Mark cycled through stages of grief and denial. He called Katherine repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperate. He sent flowers to her sister's house, only to have them returned. He even showed up at her workplace once, causing such a scene that security had to escort him out. Meanwhile, Katherine was rebuilding her life piece by piece. Her new apartment was smaller but filled with light. She reconnected with friends she'd neglected during her marriage. She started therapy, working through the pain of betrayal and examining why she'd stayed silent for so long despite her suspicions. The divorce proceedings moved forward with clinical efficiency. Katherine's attorney was thorough, presenting evidence of Mark's infidelity that made contesting the divorce futile. Their assets were divided according to the prenuptial agreement they'd signed, another document Mark had never expected to matter. 3 months after that morning in the kitchen, Mark found himself sitting in a bar, staring into a glass of whiskey. He'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The women who had seemed so exciting, so worth the risk, had all disappeared from his life once the thrill of secrecy was gone. "You look like hell," said a voice beside him. Mark looked up to see David, his oldest friend, sliding onto the adjacent barstool. David was the only person from their shared social circle who still spoke to Mark. The others had sided with Katherine, their judgment of his behavior clear in their silence. "Thanks for the update," Mark replied bitterly. "I wasn't sure." "Have you signed the papers yet?" David asked, ordering a beer. Mark shook his head. "I keep thinking if I hold out long enough, she'll agree to talk to me." David sighed. "That's not going to happen, man. You need to let her go." "I can't," Mark admitted, the words catching in his throat. "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." "That's usually how it works," David said. "But you made choices, Mark." Repeatedly. "And now you're facing the consequences." The truth of those words hit Mark hard. He had made choices, selfish, destructive choices that had shattered the foundation of his marriage. No amount of regret could undo the damage he'd caused. "I don't know how to live without her," Mark confessed. "You'll learn," David replied. "Just like she's learning to live without you." That night, Mark returned to the empty house that no longer felt like home. He sat at the kitchen counter where Katherine had placed the divorce papers and finally allowed himself to face the truth. He had destroyed something precious through his own actions. The pain he felt now was of his own making. The next day, he signed the divorce papers and had them delivered to Katherine's attorney. It was the first unselfish act he'd performed in years, giving Katherine the clean break she deserved. 6 months later, Katherine was thriving. Her work as an architectural designer had earned her a promotion. She'd started dating again, cautiously but with an openness that surprised her. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. Mark, meanwhile, had started therapy. He was confronting the patterns he'd inherited from his father, the insecurities that had driven him to seek validation outside his marriage. It was painful, exhausting work, but necessary if he ever hoped to be worthy of love again. They ran into each other at a mutual friend's wedding. Katherine was with someone new, a kind-eyed professor who looked at her with undisguised admiration. Mark was alone, sober, and still carrying the weight of his mistakes. "You look well," he said when they inevitably found themselves face to face during the reception. "I am well," Katherine replied, and he could see that it was true. There was a lightness to her that had been missing in the final years of their marriage. "I'm sorry," Mark said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Not just for what I did, but for who I was. You deserved better." Katherine studied him for a moment. "Yes, I did," she agreed. "And now I have it." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful forgiveness. Just two people who had once shared everything, acknowledging the reality of their separate paths. As Katherine walked away to rejoin her date, Mark felt a strange sense of peace. He had lost something irreplaceable through his own actions. But in that loss, both he and Katherine had found versions of themselves that were stronger, more authentic, and ultimately, more capable of genuine love. Years later, when people asked Katherine if she regretted her decision to leave her marriage, she would shake her head. "The hardest choices often lead to the greatest growth," she would say. Sometimes the end of one story is necessary for another to begin. And Mark, who eventually rebuilt his life with humility and hard-won wisdom, would carry the lesson of his greatest mistake, that love is not a possession to be taken for granted, but a gift to be honored every day. That trust, once broken, leaves scars that never fully fade. And that the choices we make when we think no one is watching are the ones that ultimately define who we are. If this story touched your heart or made you think about the choices we make in relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about love, betrayal, and redemption. Remember, it's never too late to choose integrity, but some consequences can't be undone. Share your thoughts in the comments below.